Welcome back, everybody, to the Innovative Agency. Sharon Toerek here with you again today. And I'm really looking forward to this conversation. It's not every day that I get an opportunity to interview somebody for the show who has such a vantage point of experience and a discipline that they actually wrote the book on it, and they're continuing to write the book on it. Eric, you've got version 3 coming out soon, right? Or it's
Yes,
it's
I
in the
do. The
can.
third edition of PR for Dummies will be out next year, indeed.
So Eric Yaverbaum is the author of PR for Dummies. We all know the For Dummies series. He is also an experienced agency and communications veteran and is currently founder CEO of Ericho Communications. And I'm really glad that you made time to be on the show today, Eric. Thanks for joining me.
Well, thank you so much for having me. I'm actually a big fan of your podcast.
Oh, thanks. I appreciate it. I'm 260 or whatever episodes in. I'm always still surprised when somebody tells me that they listen to it. It's
I
just
think it's my entire career was actually made by mentors and mentorship and listening to people that are smarter than me. Anytime I can listen to someone who has, better ideas than me or thinks or looks at things differently, which is
yeah.
what I think is great about what you do.
Well, thank you. And I agree with you that getting different perspectives is more and more important every day as we navigate the world. So I would really, as I was preparing to have the conversation with you today, what struck me is how much change you've seen in the PR and communications. And I know your current agency consultancy sort of blends advertising and PR together in some cases, but you've really been a veteran PR expert for a long time now. And it is a discipline that has changed a lot, like other communications disciplines. But it seems to me particularly so in the last 5 to 10 years, just the way we communicate, the channels we communicate on. And it's just I'd love to get your perspective on how it's all seemed to you and how you have
Well,
navigated and, your strategies in light of the way that it has evolved.
Well, dramatically, it's a completely different landscape than it was when I got into the business. When I got into the business, I mean, I was sort of birthed in the era of Cronkite.
Mhm,
Cronkite would finish the CBS Evening News and say, and that's the way it was. And that's the way it was. Now that's not even close.
mhm.
Information dissemination is sort of surround sound. It's social and digital media. It's, the old brick and mortar media. It's where do you get your information from? And how does your unique algorithm sort of guide you? Because, in the old days, it was not my quote, but when you come to a fork in the road, take it. That's how we make decisions. We come to a fork in the road and we decide, are we going to go right or are we going to go left?
Mhm.
All of us get so much of our information digitally now, off of our computers, off of our phones. Our algorithms are literally pulling us in directions that we're predisposed to going when we make decisions, including in the news that we're getting. So we're
Mhm.
predisposed to go in the direction of the news that we get. Is that the best way to make decisions? And I'm a strong advocate of getting stories from all different directions, hearing as many different varying perspectives as you possibly can, but and then making a decision, based on, in my case, my own experiences with all the information that I'm able to consume. But yeah,
Right.
the industry has changed dramatically. I'll just give you one, and I could tell you one of these every single year that I said, okay, things are different. Okay, things are different. I'm sitting in my office. I got 8 television screens. I'm a news junkie. I was on the news for a long time myself after I left the White House, and I'm watching the news. Eight different channels. And then on across my desk, I got 6 different computer screens. And I see on my Twitter dashboard, when it was called Twitter, everybody's standing on the wing of that plane, the plane that landed on the Hudson. I'm looking at that saying, wow, that's unbelievable. I'm seeing it on Twitter. 6.5 minutes later, it's on CNN. That particular day, I knew that the match that would be lighting a news cycle would be Twitter, when it was called
Mhm,
Twitter,
mhm.
not the CNNs of the world. It had changed that day. So many days. I mean, you know, in the course of my career,
Right.
uh, I've watched technology, I've watched information dissemination change. You know, when I was a kid, I get into the business. My first mentor was Henry Kissinger. Kissinger said to me that he used to go before the White House press corps when they were going after Nixon, which was unheard of in those days. No press went after a sitting U.S. president. Today, we got a whole different, hmm,
Yeah.
a a whole different landscape.
Yes,
But
those are
yeah,
the old days for sure.
unheard of. And Kissinger used to go up before the White House press corps and say, "Does anybody have any questions for the answers I'm already giving?" And I never knew if that story was true, at least when he told it to me. And he was one of my first mentors. And I literally built a practice on, you know, messaging. How would we be able to, how am I going to interest people watching this podcast today? What's so interesting about me?
Mhm.
Why is anybody going to listen? How am I going to get their attention? Why will they say, "Oh, what that guy had to say is fascinating. Maybe I can make some adjustments and I could be more successful," which is, you know, for me, the greatest thing that I can do in my career is pass along what I've learned and play it forward. And part of playing it forward is seeing it forward.
Right.
And, you know, what Kissinger told me grew up to become, you know, modern day messaging. That's what everybody does. Nobody answers the questions that you ask them anymore. They have the messages that they have, you know, practiced and spent a lot of time developing before they ever go on shows now, so that they can get out messages that will be impactful and that will make a difference. So,
Right.
Matt, you know, fast forward 20 years, and this story is 15 years ago. I'm having dinner with Bob Woodward, and I said, "Hey, Bob, you know, Henry Kissinger told me this story. I literally built an entire career uh, from one conversation. You know, was it true?" And Woodward said, "Yeah, it's exactly what Kissinger used to do. Come out
Mhm.
before the smartest press in the country and say, 'Anybody got any questions for the messages, for the answers I'm already giving?'"
Yeah.
And that is no matter what form of medium, whether it's social media, digital media, brick and mortar media, that's what one way that everybody should be thinking about it. But the fact that communications has changed and communications has evolved and that communications is faster, none of that is new. For 43 years, it's done all of those things. And when I was younger, a friend of mine, his name is Dan Schechter, wrote a book called "The More You Watch, the Less You Know." He wrote that book 40 years ago. He was a producer at 2020, which was a very prestigious show at the time. He left the show to write the book, "The More You Watch, the Less You Know," and that was 40 years ago. So it's not really, as much as people think it's changed, as much as people think there's so much inaccuracy and bias in the news, there actually always was.
So I I take your point, and I also take your point about there being so many more channels
Yeah.
and platforms where we get our information. And for the benefit of the agency owners and leaders listening to our conversation today, they've got to digest all of that and turn it into recommendations to their brand clients about how to create effective campaigns, messaging, brand development decisions. What do you think they need to know more now than maybe even 5 or 10 years ago
Here's
about?
here's what they definitely need. You want to run a successful agency, not for a few years. Anybody can do well for a few years. Anybody
Yeah.
can do well for a decade. You want to stick around in this industry for decades, plural, and do really well. This is the two things that agency owners need to know is all of our clients, they come to us to get exposure. That's what they want. They're paying for that. They expect that. You better deliver that. If you cannot deliver exposure to them, you will lose your jobs. If you do deliver exposure to them, which is what you promised, which is what we packaged and sold, don't pat yourself on the back about it. That's what you're supposed to do. That's what you're paid for. This
Mhm.
is what's so much more important. It's sort of unspoken. It was unspoken in corporate America my entire youth. If a company's not doing well, if their cash register isn't ringing, one of the first cuts they make is the communications people. They're cut first. You better make sure that the brands that you're working on are fiscally healthy. And how can we work in with very powerful mediums. I have the ability to convince people to think differently, to buy a widget, to vote in a different direction, to feel, you know, a certain passion. We have the ability to do that because we play in all of those mediums. bringing people to the bridge, having them cross the bridge and go over to the cash register and buy something. That's our job. And I don't mean necessarily buy the widget, buy the philosophy, change their way of thinking,
Yeah.
inspire them to change. If we don't do that, it doesn't matter how much press we get for our clients, doesn't matter how much exposure we get. You will lose the client anyway.
Right.
I have clients on my roster that have been with me for 4 decades. Absolutely every one of them is successful. Otherwise, they wouldn't have kept us. It was so important to me, and that's why I think that PR practitioners and agencies, they sell themselves short a little bit if they don't get it, if they're not sitting on boards, if they don't have audience with the chairman or the chairwoman. They're making a big mistake, because you got to be in the room where the decisions are made if you really want to influence the decisions in a way that you can impact the company's bottom line.
Hmm. That's really prescient, because that is really an evergreen truth that exists no matter what strategies or tactics are going to be most effective to get your client across that bridge, right? You've got to be in front of the right eyes and ears so that you really understand. What I hear you saying is so that you can really understand what their goals are and what constitutes success for them.
Well, yeah, it's also when I was younger, I mean, I always thought I was so brilliant. Life taught me a lot of hard lessons, which it will everybody. If you're smart, you'll learn
Hmm.
from the lessons that real experience can teach you, and make adjustments accordingly. But when I was younger, we got hired by the director of PR, who reported to the senior director, who reported to the VP of communications, who reported to the VP of marketing, who reported to the CEO. And I would think, like, can I just talk to the CEO for a minute? And that was unheard of. We had no seats at the table at the time. And I was invited, when I was very young, I was invited to join the Young Presidents Organization, my company, something you need to get invited into. You got to be big enough and make enough to even be invited in. And, I was minimum criteria to make it in New York City. And I was very intimidated by the crowd. It was everybody's I mean, everybody was famous in there except for me. Lauder and Ferragamo. Everybody's like, oh my God, what am I doing here? And I learned about leadership from being in YPO. I was so fascinated by how do leaders think, for two reasons. One is I wanted to be a better leader myself. And second is I wanted to be in their offices. I wanted to be the guy who was in there when decisions were being made. I wanted to be able to present ideas that heretofore wouldn't have been accepted as they trickled their way up the chain, because I could present them myself. In a minute, I could do that. And YPO was the beginning of a long journey of mine into the C-suite. It's one of the things that I'm best known for is, the people that I have counseled directly, in the course of my career. And, I wrote, my biggest selling book wasn't a PR book. It was a book on leadership. It was called Leadership Secrets of the World's Most Successful CEOs. And I interviewed 140 of the most powerful chair people in the world. And I asked them the same 4 questions so I could figure out what's the secrets of great leadership. And I'll save you buying the book. There's no secret. Everybody does it differently. But what I was able to do, and the audiences that I was able to have chair people, made all the difference, for my agency, because I could convince people without all of those layers in between us to take a chance in doing some of the concepts that I presented throughout the course of my career,
Yeah.
or just to influence them to do it in a way that I knew that would work. One thing
Right.
I know as an agency guy is, if you hire us, you're going to get a lot of press. You're going to be in the news. You'll get a lot of attention, definitely. But what's more important is, what do we do for your actual company? What do
Right.
we actually do for your bottom line? What do we do for your billings? What do we do for the widgets you sell? What do we do for the agenda you're trying to, convince people of?
Well, right. Because if you can't move the needle in any of those areas, you're not really adding value. I mean, you're doing tasks, but you're not really advancing the goals of the client business. Do you think it's more challenging today than it was maybe 10 years ago for agencies to actually get access to the key C-suite decision makers that they need to speak with to,
Well,
um,
I'm sure, I'm sure people will say that it is. I say, hell no. I mean, I wanted to do that. I did this on purpose. Intentionality is a superpower. I mean, you want to get in that office, get in that office. I
mhm,
mean, you don't have to write a book, to be the person that's invited to, to sit on boards, to be the person who's invited to speak to the chairman. You don't have to do that. But only if you buy that philosophically. If you do buy it philosophically that, gosh, if I could be in the room with the top decision maker, how many decisions would be made that I could influence, which would mean that my agency could do a better job because I actually know what I'm doing. I'm really good at what I do. I'm not good at anything, nothing else. I got one thing that I'm great at:
mhm.
information dissemination. I know how to communicate to impact the way that people think. I know how to do that. That's the reason that we get hired. That's the reason we bill as much as we bill. We're good at that. So let me talk to the person who makes that decision. If you actually believe that philosophically, then you should make it your business to get into that room.
Interesting. So you mentioned book, so that's a good segue into what I really want to ask you about the whole PR for Dummies project or experience, if you will. As you were updating it this most recent time, what struck you as some of the most profound differences or changes that you were writing about this time
Well,
that
I,
weren't in
I'm
the previous editions?
I'm in the middle of
Yeah.
rewriting third edition. It comes out the beginning of the first quarter next year. Uh,
Hmm.
it's that book is hard to write. It's not when you do when you're a writer writing new books, it's the glamour behind the curtain is there is no glamour behind the curtain. It's just hard. PR for Dummies, it was of all the books that I've written, it has for me, it's got to be my philosophies. My philosophies are always considered so irreverent and so quote unquote out of the. I mean, when I was a kid, they would write about me and say so out of the box. And one of my clients, who's now written about 100 books or somewhere near there, he's reading an article about me. He says, Eric, it says you're really an out of the box thinker. Do you have any idea where the box is? And I didn't know there was such a thing as a box. I didn't know there was, parameters that I was supposed to operate within. I
Hmm.
I feel that to be successful at what I do for a living, I have to continually operate outside of the box. The irony is, I write PR for Dummies the first time, and 52 universities make it required reading for their intro to PR classes. This means kids are now learning my philosophies, my quote unquote out of the box theories are now becoming the box. So, what's most striking to me about writing the book the third time over the course of 25 years is how little of what I've done and written about before I can use in this book. It's almost a complete 100% rewrite because that's how much the landscape has changed. And again,
Wow.
the velocity of which the communications has changed, it's always changed, always. The velocity at which it's changing, it's breathtaking. I mean,
Mhm.
it's impacting the world. And, in the old days, when I was younger, I had a reputation for I was a crisis guy and the guy who was the CEO whisperer. I had direct access after about 10 years in business. The crisis work that we did, which we were paid really, really well for, I used to work like this. And without naming the client, because you've never heard the crisis because we handle it. Crisis breaks in another country. I get a call on a Friday. That crisis it's gonna hit a wire server. It's gonna be in the United States on Monday. I got I got about 50 to 55 hours to prep for that crisis before it hits the United States. Now I have 1 second, which basically, and Elizabeth Dole taught me, or said to me that the worst time to prepare is while the river is rising. The river is it's overflowing now. If you don't have a crisis plan in place today, you're already late to the party. You get hit by any sort of a crisis that you couldn't possibly imagine, and you're hit flat-footed, and that story sticks for a day, maybe two. it sticks. It's very hard to take, those stories back out of the internet, once they've circulated. You need to be fast on your feet, and part of that is being prepared. It's, to me, it's the best insurance plan you'll ever have for communications.
So I wonder, as you're going through the exercise of completely rewriting this and thinking about the pace of change, how has the integration of PR and communications work into an overall MarCom strategy changed? Right? It's how much do these things all need to lace together in a way that they probably didn't have to? Because it was very siloed, right? I mean, traditionally,
Yeah,
communicate.
yes, it was. I never thought that it should be, but yes, it was.
Right.
And one of the things I used to pontificate about when I was younger is why it shouldn't be siloed, why everything ought to be integrated. Like
Yeah.
why when I was younger, we were representing Deutsche Advertising, a guy named Donnie Deutsch, who grew up to be, most people will know him nowadays from, he's a pundit, a political pundit on MSNBC.
Mhm.
Before he was a political pundit, he was probably the most successful Madison Avenue executive for decades. His agency grew from, I don't know, 20 people to, it was $1 billion agency when he sold it. Very, very successful. And we worked with, I worked directly with Donnie. I was the glorified account executive, when I was younger in my agency that was, I don't know, 10 people in the beginning. And the work and we ended up sharing clients, and the work that we did together, the way that we integrated the advertising and the PR, I thought, well, I don't get, doesn't everybody do this? It's so
Mhm.
much more value for your dollar. Now, again, I'm going back decades ago. I thought that then. I
Yeah.
think, more so now. And it's not perfect. It's actually, it's far from perfect, but
Right.
everybody should be integrating their messaging across all platforms. And then you take a look at the platforms. Take just social media, just as one example. Facebook is a lot different than, what gets traction on Facebook is a lot different than what gets traction on TikTok, is a lot different than what gets traction on Instagram, is a lot different than Twitter. They're all different. So how do you take the same theme and deliver the message in a different way to a different platform? And, with emphasis on the message should always be the same. It doesn't
Right.
matter how you're doing it. It should be the same. Do you do that? Because if you don't, you're wasting your money. You're sending
Yeah.
out different messages to different people.
I think that is such truth. And I also think that we're finally getting to a stage where it's begrudging, I think, but sales and marketing are now starting to understand that they've got to be integrated and collaborative, because the traditional old school way, when you didn't get results, to handle it was to say, well, sales isn't set up to handle, the results of all the marketing we're doing. And then sales would say, well, marketing is putting out messaging that's not bringing the right companies, people, customers, whatever, to us so that we can actually turn them into dollars and revenue. I think they're being forced now to work together, to collaborate, to understand each other better. Um,
Well,
because
again, another thing, why
it always
wouldn't
should have been
they?
that way. Yeah.
Oh, I mean, not to keep telling stories about when I was a kid, but when I got into the business, one of our divisions that grew up and was very profitable for us was an infomercial division. We represented all the big infomercials. We represented them, and I could see what these direct response companies did. They bought time. They measured it against sales. Where they got a lot of sales, they bought more time. It was a direct correlation. They measured everything. And I
Hmm.
thought, well, why isn't everybody measuring everything about what we do?
Right.
Shouldn't it be that if we're, if you're an author, if you write a book and you get on the Today Show, you will get a bestseller. I can tell you that you're going to get it, unless you're, not a great interview. You need to do that with everything. You need to know, where are the places that we need to be? What are the messages that will generate sales? And you won't be doing that unless you're working together with cross disciplines, and it's still not. It still does not happen the way that it ought to
Right.
happen.
Right. I think I agree with you. I do think that there's more awareness around the need for the collaboration though than there was before, which
Oh,
I think is an important thing.
there is, but we still have, in corporate America, I call it the political football field, and it doesn't matter what the organization is that there's a lot of politicking, everybody, the whole notion of teamwork. If everybody was on the same team in every place that I worked, how much easier it would be. I always feel like
Yeah.
I'm elbowing my way through the hallways to get things done. We actually all want the same thing. We all just want to be paid, and we all
Yeah.
want to be paid more next year, which means the places that we work need to be doing better.
Right.
So, shouldn't we all want to contribute to doing better? I mean, the metaphorical parallel of sports and corporate America, the best teams win, and everybody being on the same page behooves everybody.
Right. Agreed. Well, what a way to drop the mic. I agree with you entirely. And this has been a delightful and really fascinating conversation. So, Eric Yaverbaum, thank you so much for spending
Uh,
time with me today. If agencies want to learn more about Ericho and the work that it does, where are some of the best places for them to find you?
Well, this is the thing that I always say about agencies. I practice what I preach. Just Google my name. And since no one will ever remember my name, which is Yaverbaum, I wrote PR for Dummies. You can find my name there and you can
Yep.
work backwards. Because here's the thing about what I do for a living. I pontificate this. If you Google me or my agency, you will find something this week. It won't matter and it won't matter what week this airs, because we practice what we preach. I want people to see my own agency or myself as a subject matter expert in my own field that I pontificate about.
Yeah.
Everybody should do that. So I'm easy to find. Just Google me.
Got it. I love it. All right, Eric, thank you so much for spending your time with us today.
Uh,
And thank all of you for joining us. It has been a fun tour through PR and communications, and I will look forward to seeing you on the next episode. And until then, everybody stay well. Take care.